Well, it's that time again. It's time to find ourselves another game out there waiting around in the multiverse that's getting mixed reviews. And it's time to figure out why that is and whether or not it's valid for that particular game. On this episode of the Deserves Better series, we are covering Yooka-Laylee. Most games I've covered on this channel are well known enough that they don't need an introduction, but this time it's a bit different as we are covering a title I'm not sure many are even aware exists. And that's partly due to it being a very young franchise. Hell, can we even really call it a franchise at this point? This series could be dead in the water as I'm writing this, and I don't even realize it. That's how irrelevant this game is at this particular point in time. But I suspect that another reason for it not being well known is due to how unspectacularly it was received by those who gave it the time of day. I digress. Yooka-Laylee was developed by Playtonic Games, an offshoot team of former Rare employees, the same company that brought us the fabled Banjo Kazooie series. They made the game with the clear intention of recapturing the collectathon magic of Banjo Kazooie, and quite literally, they wanted to make the game a spiritual successor to that series. By doing so, they essentially had no choice but to make this game a collectathon, as doing anything else with the gameplay would completely divert from their main goal. Going this route, however, especially in 2017, came with a lot of inherent risk. Crafting a modern game based off an old school style of play was never going to be easy to pull off, as many would consider that the collectathon specifically is not only a played out style, but it is also severely obsolete. The memories that many of us share as late 90s to early 2000s gamers of running around these bloated maps that have no business being that big just to grab a bundle of bananas or a sweaty sock certainly are not always fond ones. And that's because the collectathon in itself is inherently repetitive. Every level you're running around looking for the same stuff, doing the same challenges in exchange for the objects you need to access walled off parts of the game. It's straight up contrived, or at least it's prone to being contrived if done incorrectly. We as fans have already beaten the dead horse that is DK64 and how poorly it handled its overuse of collectibles. So what chance does Yooka-Laylee have of striking the right balance with this formula in an era where the collectathon is all but a relic of a bygone time? The proof is in the pudding. The response to this game was indeed mixed. But hey, that makes it perfect for a series like mine where I cover said games that receive such middling reviews. So, did Yooka-Laylee ultimately get the collectathon right and recapture that Banjo Kazooie magic like many say it did? Or were critics right in saying that the gameplay is overall unoriginal and outdated? Find out on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z. Wait, what? Find out now as we uncover whether or not Yooka-Laylee deserves better. Hell yeah. Oh, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me, why don't ya? I'm trying something different with this installment, where I'm taking a more comprehensive approach to my analysis of this game. So I'll be spending less time cracking shitty tongue-in-cheek jokes and more time getting into the nitty-gritty of the video game in question. Let me know what you guys think. This will also serve as a spoiler warning to viewers. There will in fact be spoilers in this review, although there isn't really much to spoil as the plot is pretty bare bones. I'm still doing it out of consideration to those who actually care. So yeah, spoilers. With that out of the way, we're off to the races with Yooka-Laylee. Ha-cha-cha. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. We've got a game that's trying to be Banjo Threeie, and turns out that isn't the case for just the gameplay alone. It also translates to the characters that make up this world. You've got an array of goofy individuals who manifest as basically anything you can imagine, whether it be animals, mystical beings, or inanimate objects. And they all spout that familiar crude but not quite crude humor at basically every opportunity they get. Then there's the main duo of Yooka the Lizard and Laylee the Bat. And to put it as simply as possible, these two are essentially a reskinned copy of Banjo and Kazooie. Yooka is the kind-hearted, straight-laced, easygoing one, while Laylee is of course the one with all the attitude. Wisecracking insults at others whenever she can, and just overall being sassy AF. These two are the spitting image of the original bear and bird combo, and even though the duo is charming enough to carry them through the game, I gotta question the decision to make them so similar to their counterparts, especially if the developers have any plans of expanding this franchise. Because now you've got two separate franchises that are way too similar to each other, competing for the attention of fans. And when you take into account the fact that Banjo Kazooie is easily the more well-known and well-respected of the two, Yooka-Laylee is probably going to be working with a major handicap in the long term. It turns out that there actually are pretty recent talks from both sides of new projects being in the works for both their respective properties. So that's gonna be real interesting once those projects release. I suppose, in my opinion, the best thing Yooka-Laylee could do to avoid being completely overshadowed by Banjo Kazooie would be for both sides to collaborate in some way. Maybe even create a project where both duos exist in the same universe, and they work together to fight off their respective foes. You could even have the original Bear and Bird acknowledge how old they are as a series, and essentially give the go-ahead to Yooka-Laylee to help them carry the collectathon genre forward for future generations. Not necessarily in a passing of the torch moment, but as a way to solidify both sides as separate but equal entities. That way you've got Banjo Kazooie on one end satisfying the old fanbase, and Yooka-Laylee on the other introducing the collectathon to a younger generation of fans, but in such a way that is more digestible to the modern palate. That'd be so cool. I'd play the hell out of that. But please, whatever you do, don't pit them against each other like Family Guy and The Simpsons did. Because nobody wants that. Because it's dumb. Like, it's really, really dumb. Anyways, I suppose we should get back to talking about the actual game in question. So now that we've been introduced to Yooka-Laylee, it's time to see what type of shit goes down that forces them on their big adventure. We start off with our lead pair cooling out on their wrecked ship they call their home, and they've come across a magical book known as the One Book, which evidently grants insane powers to its user. We meet Capital B, the greedy CEO of Ivory Towers Corporation, who devises a plan to steal the book for himself so he can use its powers to change reality to how he sees fit. He succeeds in this using a contraption that sucks up pages from various books across the world. And now Yooka-Laylee must travel to Ivory Towers and retrieve the lost pages. Capital B is a very effective main antagonist. There's always something so unlikable about that greedy corporate character that never fails in making you excited to see them get their comeuppance in the end. Not only that, but with Capital B in particular, he also backs up his horrible personality with a very imposing look. This guy has a large, girthy frame that makes him appear more imposing to the player, and he's got these fat, beady, crazy eyes to him that suggest the makings of a complete psychopath underneath to boot. And I mean, sure, with Yooka-Laylee being a very light-hearted game, I'm obviously reading way too deeply into this character, but come on, you can't deny, this man looks and feels like a threat.
When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore.
So, in order to retrieve their stolen pages, Yooka and Laylee follow the source of the suction device to Ivory Towers, where we are formally presented with the game's central hub world. It's this massive skyscraper with innumerous floors and varying rooms and hallways that give off dingy, depressing, assembly-lined factory vibes. It's a very effective hub world because it feels like there's so much going on, and there's plenty of varying rooms and paths to explore that it doesn't just feel like a hollow vehicle to transport the player from one level to another. But at the same time, there aren't too many branching paths in that it feels like a fucking maze. I initially didn't like this hub world upon my first playthrough, as I felt the overall theme of the world was too dark and monotonous. Each of the rooms all felt too samey, and the depressing dirtiness of it all just made me simply not enjoy being in this space. All I wanted was the color and vibrancy of the actual book worlds, and it felt like this hub world was just holding me back from that. But then over time, I came to realize that that's exactly what the developers want you to feel in this space. Yooka and Laylee, after all, are not supposed to be here right now. This is the main base of operations of a powerful, greedy psychopath who actively wants to disrupt their way of life. We've essentially entered the lair of the dragon, so it's only natural that this place be very unpleasant to travel through. You got waves upon waves of minions trying to stop you from progressing any further, bottomless pits that will send you plummeting to your demise, varying traps and safety hazards designed simultaneously to add life to this environment and also to slow you down. And it gets even more sinister as you make your way to the rooftops, where you start to see the more hollow, corporate aspects to the business. You find these massive stacks of books everywhere and these giant golden statues of Capital B strewn about, highlighting the ego-driven excesses of corporate greed that he's so clearly willing to entertain himself with. You also begin to realize just how expansive this whole operation is as you reach the rooftops. This isn't just one tall skyscraper like I had initially thought. It's actually a series of skyscrapers linked together from miles apart, capped off with capital B's penthouse built on top of everything else. I mean, just look at these views, dude. This is just insane. Now we absolutely have to go check out the game's 5 book worlds and see if they receive this same kind of attention. The book worlds are this game's version of the non-linear stages you enter to collect stuff. There are 5 total stages to explore here, and keeping in theme with the overworld, each one is considerably large in scope. The main characteristic these worlds have in common is their wide open and non-linear nature, similar to the collectathons that have come before it. You can approach a stage however you see fit, completing tasks and other challenges in any random order. There are no wrong answers here. You can also traverse a stage from any angle, whether it be with its multiple pathways or simply its open nature that allows you the freedom to move in any direction without being obstructed by staging devices that attempt to funnel you in a certain direction. The main thing that makes each world unique is of course its theming. We've got a prehistoric world, a snow and ice world, a swamp world, a casino, and whoa, a space world. Oh yeah, you stay right there, Space World. I'll be coming back to discuss you later. Sorry about that. Overall, each world commits to its theme quite thoroughly, even going as far as to change the outfit of the enemies found in the worlds to match the overarching theme. Minions in the prehistoric world can be found wearing skulls as masks, but then in the space world they'll have these big pulsating brains as if they're aliens. It's all well and good fun, and overall I don't think there's any one stage here that I would deem as flat out bad, but I will say that the swamp world is easily the most boring world of the bunch. While every other stage's design is generally just bright and vibrant and full of life, making them actually exciting to explore, Swamp World is the exact opposite of that. It's dark, dreary, super ugly, and seemingly no matter where you go on this map, every section just looks the exact same, making it easier to get lost in. Seriously, everything in this world looks like literal barf. Like, the grass, the trees, they all just look like real, actual upchuck. I would argue that Swamp World in general is the low point of the entire game. It comes right at the midpoint where you've pretty much settled into the game's formula, and that initial excitement from before has all but worn off. And now you unfortunately gotta deal with this dull, laborious, mucky level where the aesthetic stops being interesting well within a few minutes of starting it. The following level, Casino World, picks things back up a bit with the high-energy, hustle and bustle nature of a casino. Again, it does a fantastic job of committing to this role and making you really feel like you're immersed in this big-shot corporate scam that is this casino. But I feel it may actually be overcommitting with this coin system that it implemented. To preface this, the main currency in this game, the most important thing you are collecting to help you progress through the game are these golden pages of the one book called Pages. Now, in most situations, the game is mainly just having you complete a task and you collect a pagey. But this level, I guess for the sole reason of committing even further to the gimmick of gambling in a casino level, decides to have you complete tasks for coins rather than pages. And once you collect 10 coins, you can then trade them in for a pagey. So, I ask you this, my fellow viewers. Why? It is so not worth putting this little bit of extra trouble on the player to collect this thing that is required to advance in the game, just so you could have a little extra fun with your gambling gimmick? Like, we get it already. We're in a fucking casino. There's slot machines everywhere. The characters are making constant commentary about how casinos are scams. There's flashing lights and fucking giant houses of cards and fucking giant blackjack tables everywhere. We know we're in a goddamn casino. Having to collect coins just to cash them in for pages feels like an unnecessary addition to this level, as it just drags out the process of collecting the pages, while also not adding anything at all to the gameplay. My first thought with this choice was that they wanted to spice things up, since this was the 4th world in, and not have it be the same old collect pagey and leave scenario. But this doesn't spice anything up at all. If you want to shake up the formula a bit for the sake of it, adding a coin exchange system does nothing except make your collection process more of a slog. It's just one more collectible the game was doing just fine without in previous worlds, so it did not need to exist here. How does adding coins in this level make the gameplay any more interesting? Can someone please tell me? Had this coin system not been added here, I would have called Casino World one of the highlights of the entire game, but it nearly ruins the whole thing for me. And having this be preceded by the massive bore that is Swamp World, man, I'd wager to say that the entire middle section of Yooka-Laylee is generally very mediocre. Which sucks too, because the other 3 worlds are pretty much A to S tier levels, especially Space World. But I'll get to that later. I digress. Yet another little extra wrinkle that was added to change up the worlds that I absolutely have to question is the expanded worlds. Upon unlocking each stage, you have the ability to expand each world after collecting a certain number of pages, in turn unlocking new areas within that world, which more or less just contain more of the same collectibles. And that's it. That's all the expanding the world does. It just unlocks these new areas that I guess were walled off before, but are brought in for you, all because you had enough pages to essentially buy them? Yeah. The developers actually decided it was a good idea to implement in-game paywalls, using a currency that they created for their own game. Am I missing something here? What exactly does this system contribute to, well, anything about the game? During my first playthrough, I thought that this feature was optional, that you could go the extra mile and unlock the expanded worlds if you were committed enough to completion or something like that. But considering that there are a grand total of 145 pages to collect in-game, and you need at least 100 of those to make it to the final boss, and 125 of those 145 pages are found in the main levels, you're most likely going to have to unlock the expanded worlds. So if that's the case, then why bother creating this whole process to begin with? Why not just have each world be completely expanded already upon entering each one for the first time? They could be pre-spanded. Why put the player through this pointless process of leaving the level so we can cash in our pages, expand, and jump back in? It's silly, I tells ya. Silly. And I won't stand for it.
That's all I can stand. I can't stand no more.
The world expansion system is indubitably more pointless than the coin system from the Casino World. Anyone else starting to see a trend in this game? At the very least, this instance doesn't actively impede my progress for more than a minute or two, because that's all it really takes to jump out of the level, watch the cutscene where the book expands, and jump back in. But again, why? It's so fucking stupid. Why do they think this was worth putting in the fucking game? I'm so fucking pissed off at the stupid shit that wastes my time and wastes the developers' time too. What the fuck were they thinking? This is some fucking bullshit. Alright guys, I took a few minutes to calm down, and I think I'm ready to get back to talking about this game. We left off discussing the worlds, but now I think it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of the gameplay. What is Yooka-Laylee having us do in order to earn pages? The main thing is completing various asks and requests from characters hanging around the map. You can find a many number of folk hanging around, such as the 4 pigs of Hamelot, or whatever they're called. The skeleton Jumanji explorer, who's always getting himself into trouble. Or wait, is it a she? Kartos, the old minecart. The list of wacky characters you meet speaks for itself, and they all have a bunch of different challenges for you to complete to get pages, with some challenges being more stimulating to complete than others. There is also a very basic move purchasing system set in place where you can buy certain moves that'll be required for certain tasks down the line. I generally enjoy the pages that require me to go find something or someone, as that forces me to explore a bit more, which is something I'm usually never mad about doing. I also like pages that have me completing an obstacle course of some kind, because they usually put my purest of platforming skills and reaction timing to the test. I won't lie, it's kinda difficult to remember any particular pages, and that's mainly because there are quite a lot of them to collect. And also, there isn't that little celebratory animation after getting one, so it kinda makes each pagey feel less special. The best thing collecting pages has going for it are the challenges that have you using a combination of your platforming and critical thinking skills, or as close to critical thinking as you can get in this game. The ones where you not only must parkour across a crazy death trap, but you also must think ahead while doing so. The worst of the bunch are the ones that have you doing medial tasks such as completing pop quizzes. Oh my god, these suck. Dear developers, Please stop using quizzes as cop-outs in games. I haven't met one person who enjoys being quizzed on stuff about the game while they're in it. You expect us to pay enough attention to be prepared for them when they pop up, and yet nobody ever is. Doesn't that tell you something? Rextro, the arcade dinosaur, is just the cutest little thing. He honestly might be my favorite character in the whole game, just because he's exactly like me in that he gets overly excited over old, outdated games that nobody else cares about, and they just look at him like he's a pathetic, sad, lonely sack of shit. Anyways, he offers you some arcade challenges where you can play through mini-games crafted around the retro arcade style for pages. And while I admire the effort of implementing these mini-games to change things up a bit, most of them are just flat out terrible. They are either really slow, really one-dimensional, or... wait, that's it. Hey, just like real-life arcade games. Wow, this game is so effing realistic! Whenever I'm playing these minigames, all I'm really thinking about is how soon I could be done with them. And then Rextro always asks me if I want to go again to try and beat his high score for another pagey, and I'm always like, okay Rextro, but I'm only doing it for you. Because I love you. Each level will also have its own boss fight to attend to, and they are overall consistent across the board, as well as surprisingly challenging. It's refreshing, actually, to finally be playing a modern video game that actually has boss fights that aren't pathetic. It almost brings a tear to my eye. In the year 2020, boss fights have become a lost art. Have become a lost art.
Have become a lost art. There was a time not long ago when games actually cared about.
My surprisingly favorite part about these bosses is that they almost always come from out of nowhere, which to me is a great way to re-zap my attention span after spending a good chunk of time grinding for pages. Man, there's just something so cool about fighting an entire planet and blowing it to smithereens after. Oh man, it's great. Nice. Once you've collected 100 pages, you can now confront Capital B at the top of Ivory Towers. His sidekick Dr. Quack soundly surrenders, which makes sense given that we've already owned his ass on 3 separate occasions at his own pop quizzes, which, again, take notes developers, please never do this shit again. Fighting Capital B is a lot like a semester final rather than a pop quiz. You've known that it's been coming since the beginning, and you've been given plenty of time to prepare for it, and yet somehow when the day arrives, you completely draw a blank. Just kidding. This final boss isn't that bad, really, but he does actually serve a decent challenge for once, and he does actually test you on all your moves that you've learned throughout the game. Much of these moves include a bubble shield, the ability to shoot berries, the ability to fly. Pretty much all the bases are covered with Capital B. He does border a little on the excessive side towards the end. I mean, come on. At this point, he's taken so many hits, you wonder whether or not our man's is a bee or a sponge. But I would rather, for a final boss, have him be a little overkill than completely underwhelming. I mean, this is the climax of your entire game right here, bruh. It absolutely has to deliver. And that's something that, and I can't believe I'm saying this about a modern video game, Yooka-Laylee actually pulls off. It actually has a really good final boss. My god. Boss fights have become a lost art. And there you have it, folks. Capital B soundly defeated and his evil plans foiled. Now fuck off back to the bee equivalent of a sweatshop where you produce honey for other bees who are more successful than you. Yooka-Laylee certainly has a lot to prove acting as the spiritual successor to Banjo Kazooie. And while this series could never possibly hope to fill the void left behind by the original Baron Bird, it did make some good strides in preserving while also improving upon the golden formula for a collectathon established by past games. Now, before I go ahead and give my verdict on whether or not Yooka-Laylee deserves peas and carrots, I want to try something new for this episode, where I end things off with a sort of mock awards show. I'm going to give out my picks for the best and worst moments of the entire game. And seeing how that goes, I will continue the trend for future episodes of the Deserves Better series. With that said, my pick for the best moment of the game, hands down, goes to the entire level that is Space World. Okay, fine, I'll call it by its real name, Galleon Galaxy. This, my friends, has to be the single coolest level in all of gaming history. Not only does it come packaged with the single greatest aesthetic for a level in gaming history, but it backs it up with the most enjoyable set of pages to collect throughout all of Yooka-Laylee. This time, you're set in space, where you get to fly the cosmos searching for pages, and the deep space aura that encompasses this whole map is one of the most tranquil and uplifting things I've ever seen. I absolutely love the deep space purple that gleams in the sky and the vibrant blue that reflects off the water. The music makes you feel like you're struggling through a massively epic space opera, and overall it is just so fun to fly around this world and explore. It's so captivating getting lost in the literal planet-sized structures of this world, as it feels like you've reached a level to this adventure that Banjo Kazooie could never even dream of. And there aren't any pages that I can think of that are annoying to get in any way. It all just flows so perfectly and acts as the perfect final level to a video game, and is, quite honestly, possibly the best level in a game ever. That's how much I loved it. I liked fighting the boss. I loved figuring out the puzzle in this room, although I'm pretty sure I glitched it. I loved playing some black hole golf. I didn't even mind doing a little space fishing. And most of all, I was taken aback by just how grand this level felt, and that is something I will never forget. Alright, and now my pick for absolute worst part of the game goes to the minecart challenges. Yeah, so straight up, these are just awful. Just awful. Where do I begin? Kartos seems like a pretty cool guy. I don't have any issues with him, but the way in which his little minecart thing here works is something to behold. You gotta collect a certain number of gems along this minecart course before you reach the end. But my god, these controls are just so out of whack. Not to mention the cheap obstacle placement, like such as right when you're turning a corner and then suddenly there's an obstacle there and you have absolutely no time to react to it. And also the fact that apparently you can brake in midair with this thing, but the brake button just doesn't work half the time. I don't know if I'm doing it wrong or if I'm not doing it hard enough. I mean, I swear to god, it just straight up just doesn't work. The jump height system is so crazy too. It's like you have to perfectly measure your jumps. Otherwise, you might just be fucked. So, I don't know, man. This section just feels jank as all heck. It honestly feels cheap and ancient, kind of like, games of the past who would just make their game harder simply by making it cheap. Yeah, that's the best way I can sum up this section of the game. Yooka-Laylee was always going to be fighting an uphill battle from the beginning. They took a huge leap of faith when they decided to create a Banjo Kazooie clone from thin air. So, was it worth it? Was it worth putting this game out there with the hopes that modern audiences would see past the dated game mechanics, while old fans would accept the jarring similarities it has to their favorite classic games? Ultimately, I respect the hell out of Playtonic Games for following through with this project. They were a crew of ex-Rare employees who listened to the passionate pleas from fans for someone, anyone, to bring back their favorite platformer from an age gone by. And while Yooka-Laylee holds its own well enough with its own refined take on the classic collectathon style, and the gameplay and graphics are just as smooth as they have ever been, I'm sorry, but Yooka-Laylee is simply just not revolutionary enough in my eyes to warrant any higher praise than the mixed reception it's received. It's a good enough game if you need a decent alternative to your usual library, but it doesn't leave a lasting enough impression, mainly because it's far too derivative of games of old. With that said, no, Yooka-Laylee does not deserve better. And, whoa, I just realized, this is the first game in my Deserve Better series that actually did not get my seal of approval. We've come such a long way, haven't we? My intention with my negative verdict is not to discredit the game in any way. All I'm saying is that the mixed reviews are completely justified. Perhaps when we finally get that sequel that is evidently in the works, then our lizard and bat pairing will have a second chance to really carve their own path and realize their full potential. We saw it happen with Banjo Tooie, which was hands down a bigger and more fully realized final draft of Banjo Kazooie. So anything's possible. When Yooka-Laylee 2 does come out, I'll look forward to giving it a try. I'm Marky Mark peacing out. See you around for my in-depth critique of Sonic Frontiers once people finally shut the f*** up about it. Peace, I'm out.